Thank you everybody for dialing in this evening and taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this whistle-stop webinar on strategy. Some of you may know that just under a year ago, TAS launched an e-learning academy with a view to distributing accessible, affordable, critical training and education to associations and board members. There's a number of modules currently available, ranging from risk management through to finance fundamentals and strategy planning. As it's the end of the financial year, we thought it would be a great opportunity to try and deliver a bit of extra added value to TAS clients. So this evening, we're going to tell you about how you can unlock a free module from the e-learning academy, Strategic Planning for Boards. This webinar should last about 20 minutes. We're going to cover what strategic thinking is. We're going to cover how to call together a strategic planning workshop for your association. We'll cover some common pitfalls and explore how to measure success. Hopefully at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A. Next slide, please, Megan. So, good evening, everybody. Megan and I are your hosts this evening. My name is Emma. As you can probably tell, I'm British. I moved over from the UK to Australia about 5 weeks ago. It's obviously a pleasure to be here. My background is business management and leadership, and thankfully I am joined this evening by the much loved and long-standing TAS member, Megan. Megan's got years of experience supporting associations with their strategy, and we're going to be running this webinar for you this evening together.
Thanks for joining.
So, next slide, Megan. So, we're going to start the webinar with a short story. The story is called Strategy versus Tactics. In a Stanford class on entrepreneurship, the professor enters the room and divides his class into teams. Each team is given a $5 bill, a 2-hour window within which to invest that $5 to create as much money as possible. At the end of the exercise, every team is given a 3-minute window to present their success and their achievements to the rest of the class. Most Stanford students will fail this challenge. Typical answers on how to invest the $5 range from buying startup materials to create a car wash or a lemonade stand, and they range to buying lottery tickets or putting the full $5 on red on the roulette table. However, the teams that do better and don't completely fail the challenge realize that the $5 is an essentially worthless resource. It's a distraction. So they undertake the exercise starting from nothing. However, the teams that make the most money are the teams that realize that the $5 bill and the 2-hour window are the least valuable assets in their arsenal. And it's actually the 3-minute presentation time to a captivated Stanford audience that's of real value. And they sell that 3-minute presentation time to an agency hoping to recruit Stanford students. That team walk away with hundreds of dollars and they essentially win the challenge. The $5 challenge illustrates the difference between tactics and strategy. Although those terms are often used interchangeably, they refer to completely different concepts. A strategy is a plan for achieving an objective. Tactics, in contrast, are actions you undertake to implement a strategy. The Stanford students who failed the $5 challenge fixated on the tactic, how to use the $5, and they lost sight of the overall strategy. Tactics without strategy is noise before defeat. Just because the $5 bill is sitting in front of you, it doesn't necessarily mean it is the right tool for the job. When we're blinded by tools, we stop seeing other possibilities in the peripheries. Next slide, Megan. So thinking strategically is not everyone's skill set. And a first step that can be highly valuable is to start by assessing the skills and the expertise and the experience that you've got around you when you're starting to pull together a strategy for your association. The TAS Online Academy outlines 4 parameters for putting a great plan in place, which are essentially 4 questions that you should ask yourself right at the beginning of this process. The questions are, where are you now? Where is the association? How is it featuring in amongst everything else that's going on in the wider market? Making sure that you've got up-to-date financials, completing a simple and basic tool, such as a SWOT analysis or a PESTLE. Combining that with great competitor analysis is a fantastic way of assessing your current position. The second question is, where do you want to go? Where are you taking your association? What's the mission? Do you have a clear and well articulated vision? And what are your high-level association objectives? Question 3 is, how are you going to get there? Putting a plan in place is one thing, but without having actionable objectives and detail to underpin that plan renders it worthless. And question 4 is, how do you know when you've arrived? It's important to have a strong plan, but it's absolutely essential that you check back in with that plan on a regular basis and assess success, assess movement. Are you heading in the right direction? Do things need to change? And what are the indicators for to tell you so either way? With so much change impacting our markets and our economies all of the time, the term agile is often now used when talking about strategy and planning. A faster, more responsive mindset is now sort of commonly called upon in comparison to the more traditional strategic planning approach. And making sure that your strategic plan goes hand in hand with the budget. So it's a perfect time of year to start looking at last year's performance and thinking ahead. Megan, just before we move to the next slide, is there anything you'd like to add to that section?
I think starting to think about where it is that your organization wants to go and making sure that those activities align also with your organization's objectives is really important. So for some organizations, perhaps that have been around for a really long time, you might actually need to take one step back and start looking at your vision and your mission and your purpose and making sure that that aligns as well. Quite often, an older association may have been established for one purpose, but the world has changed and their organization has evolved, so that can sometimes be your very first step when you're starting to work through a strategic planning session.
Fantastic, thanks Megan. Next slide please. So once you've started working through that sort of foundational exercise of understanding where your association is and where you want to get to, a fantastic next step that's recommended in the online modules for the TAS Academy is to pull together a strategic planning workshop. It's not straightforward, so don't stick it in the diary for tomorrow. We highly recommend you do a huge amount of preparation in advance to really squeeze as much value out of one of these workshops as possible. A strategic thinking session can be high value if it's well organized, well facilitated with strong follow-up. You can get really creative, so they can be really fun workshops to get stuck into blue sky thinking, whiteboards, post-it notes, digital canvases, whatever tools float your boat. When we were preparing for this webinar, Megan has some fantastic insight into how to get prepared in advance of a strategy workshop. Megan, did you want to talk through some of the top tips that you'd recommend to associations?
Thanks, Emma. I Preparation, as Emma said, is really key. And sometimes that's about understanding what the key stakeholders within your organisation are thinking about your organisation and what it is that they're looking for from you as well. Now, the most obvious stakeholder is always going to be your membership, because generally that's why you exist. But there are some other stakeholders that you might want to engage with prior to going into your strategic planning session. For example, that might be some of your organisation partners. It could be some of your sponsors. If you partner with other like-minded associations, those individuals could be worth consulting with too. I quite often like to do a bit of pre-thinking or asking those stakeholders some quite big questions. So my favourite questions tend to be, what is it that we're doing really well? What is it that we don't do well? What aren't we doing that we should be doing? And what are we doing that we shouldn't be? Because sometimes we can put an awful lot of energy and effort into a program that we think is valuable and worthwhile, but actually doesn't have very much value to some of our stakeholders, and especially for our members. And the last one is kind of, what is our why and why are we here, which kind of feeds back into that question about, is your vision, mission and purpose correct?
Thanks, Megan. So there's a fair bit to do ahead of pulling together one of these workshops. And in addition to doing your stakeholder questions, your SWOT analysis, getting your numbers up to date, we highly recommend that you go back to that skills gap analysis for your board and make sure that you've got the right people invited to the workshop. You want to make sure that you've got a really good balanced blend of experience, expertise and interest, so that the association and the strategy that you pull together for it benefit highly out of it. Not only is it important to get the right people in the room for one of these workshops, but you also want to make sure that you assign them the right roles in advance of getting together, making sure that you've got a strong facilitator, someone that's going to hold you to account, make sure that you knock off each of the points of the agenda within the agreed time frame and you focus in on the right areas. Making sure that you've got a fantastic minute taker as well, so that any gems or creative ideas or suggestions, none of it gets lost essentially throughout the day, and you're left with a good documentation, good record of what's been said, what's been agreed and what the next step should be. Having those two ends of the meeting assigned to a strong facilitator and a strong minute taker frees you up to then become creative and think about your BHAG. I don't know whether you guys have that term over here, but we use it in the UK. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's one big sort of creative idea that we have for business or associations to really focus on and challenge ourselves to think beyond the box. And ensuring that those creative, wild, outlandish perhaps ideas are always underpinned with SMART objectives. So it's one thing having a fantastic strategy, but you want to absolutely make sure that you've got actionable points that underpin that huge goal so that it's achievable and you've got a clear pathway.
That agenda, Emma, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
The agenda piece is actually really important. You want your agenda to be clearly outlined and have a very clearly defined outcome that you want for each of those sections of the agenda, because that's going to help people get in the right mindset and make sure that you're staying on track and you can always pull discussions back onto that agenda.
Absolutely perfect. And as you work through the strategy planning module on the Academy, there's some fantastic tools and templates actually that you can download. So it might feel like a lot, it's daunting looking at a blank piece of paper and thinking, strategy, where do we start? But you're not alone. You don't need to recreate the wheel. There's some fantastic actionable frameworks for you that have already been created and used multiple times. So it's highly worth tapping into those. And yet SMART objectives at the end of the day, it's one of those, again, sort of bedrock templates, SWOT analysis, PESTLE, your SMART objectives, and ensure that everybody goes away clear on what the actionable points are at the end of the meeting. And strong follow-up. You can have the most creative workshop, come up with the best strategy, and it can be documented really well. But if you never look at it again and we move on and get busy again with our day-to-day lives, it can be really easy to just forget it and get stuck back into firefighting and everything else. So make sure that you also agree a mechanism for strong follow-up beyond the end of the meeting. As I said, there's no need to recreate the wheel. So there's a QR code on this slide, which you can scan. It'll take you through to the TAS Academy. As I mentioned earlier, there's loads of tools and things like that that you can download from within the module on strategic planning. Just use the discount code that we've included here, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end, but that's available as well. Okay, so that's hosting a strategy workshop. Next area for us to explore is common pitfalls and challenges. So Megan, I'm sure you've seen all sorts of weird and wonderful scenarios with associations going through this process. We've listed a few different things for you here, but Megan, did you want to kickstart this one and share your experience?
Sure. The great thing about strategy days is you get lots and lots and lots of really great ideas, and we can very easily get super excited about every single one of them, and we have to be realistic. We're not going to be able to do every single one of them. Where most of our organizations are looked after by volunteers, and we have to often be really realistic about what it is that we can achieve and be really realistic about the types of timeframes that we've got available. Quite often getting stuck in the weeds can be a big issue. It's really hard to stay a little bit higher level and not get stuck into the conversations about why you can do it, why you can't do it, or how you should do it. At first, you want to start throwing all of the ideas around and starting to talk about them, and then working out what it is that you want to prioritize. And then once you've identified those things, then you start talking about the how. But certainly the most common thing when you're doing a strategic planning session is getting that stuck into that why you can or why you can't, or getting into war stories. We tried something similar a few years ago. That history is really useful, but really we're just trying to throw ideas out in the beginning, and then we'll get into the why we should and why we shouldn't a little bit down the track. But you can absolutely get stuck there. Anytime you do a strategic plan, things can change. And a perfect example of that is really when we start talking about the pandemic, for example. With a lot of our associations pre-pandemic, we had lots of conversations about, maybe we should do some webinars or some online content. There was a lot of people that weren't super comfortable about that, and they had a whole bunch of other strategic objectives that they wanted to work on. Pandemic came along, and all of a sudden moving online was a really big focus for them, and they had to change their strategic focus and start working on some alternative tactics there to get themselves online. So being open to change and being open and ready to adjust, and being agile, as Emma mentioned a wee bit earlier, is certainly a valuable place to be.
And that's obviously spot on, Megan, and I love a good book recommendation. So that perfectly tees up Who Moved My Cheese. If you haven't read this book, it's a fantastic sort of very quick read, all about being able to embrace change. Again, it's another sort of whole sort of field of its own. But yeah, when it comes to strategy, especially for longer standing associations, if you've been sort of trying to headbutt in a particular direction and you think actually it's time to reconsider and try other things, or just course correct slightly, for those that might struggle, that is a really great book. So I'd recommend that. You've covered that perfectly, Megan, even if I do say so myself. So I think we can probably move on to the next slide. Fantastic. So once you've hopefully avoided challenges and pitfalls and things like that, it's also really important to hopefully assume for success, but absolutely outline what success would look like from your strategy, and that short term, long term. It's not just so that you know that you're doing all of the right things, but also look for indicators that actually might suggest that you need to slightly course correct. So as Megan says, things do change. So having the right metrics sort of available to you so that you can interpret what's going on around you and take the right sort of steps after that is really important. I think it's really easy to default to sort of financial metrics when we're measuring success. Have we spent less? Have we earned more? Is the bank balance growing? And absolutely, those might be the right metrics for your association and for your strategy, but there are a whole raft of other metrics that will indicate whether you're heading in the right direction or not. There'll be association specific, strategy specific. This list that I've pulled actually directly from the module online just sort of indicates a few different ones that might be relevant for you. So it's worth absolutely having a think about how you're going to know in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 2 years' time, whether you're on track and how you need to, what you need to dial up or down on in order to get to where you want to get to. As well as having sort of the right success measures sort of around you and those also responsible for delivering this, they can be a fantastic tool for your communication. Having a strong strategy that's well articulated is a fantastic story for your association. With such high churn from members and getting funding and sponsorship, having a really clear, compelling strategy for your association can help with all of those things. And as you move through the execution process, delivering hopefully loads of fantastic results to your members and other key stakeholders, it's a great idea to keep them posted. Let them know what's working and how you're responding to things that aren't, so that you can hopefully inspire sort of commitment and support from them as well. Okay, so next slide, we're getting to the end of the content, so I hope you've got some questions lining up for us. So action points. Have a think about those different tools and start thinking about your due diligence, getting some stakeholder interviews booked in or gathering some feedback, making sure that those financials are up to date so that you can really understand and have a good sort of objective understanding of where your association is. Don't just do it by yourself, get other people around you to support with that process and start thinking about getting a workshop date in the diary. Completing a SWOT analysis for your association and getting other members of your board to do the same can always flag up some really interesting perspectives and difference in opinions. And make sure that you invest in your education. It's again, strategic thinking it doesn't come naturally to everyone. It often takes practice and we don't all have loads of time to practice these things. I've got another book recommendation for you, Blue Ocean Strategy. It's one of my old-time favorites. It is fantastic. Amazon says so as well. So invest in a new book or take a potential mentor out for a coffee, pick someone's brains that's got more experience in this field than perhaps you have. And don't forget to look at the online training that Taz have spent a long time creating, actually pulling off of all of the experience that they've got as well. And we'll share the link for the 2 books that we've recommended after the webinar for you. Megan, did you have any final points on that, or any top tools or books you'd like to recommend?
Probably not so much books, but certainly talking to people. Talk to other organizations that might be similar and in a similar environment to you. Don't be afraid to steal other people's really fantastic ideas either. And understanding where you are financially is certainly really, really important. And if you do have a really fabulous idea that comes out of your strategic planning session that you think you'd really like to focus on, exploring alternative options to fund that can be part of your strategic discussions as well. So don't always be limited by exactly what you've got now, because opening your mind and being open to alternate revenue sources can also help you to deliver some really great achievements. We quite often recommend putting together a plan on a page that kind of documents. So that brings together your organizational vision and mission and purpose, and then the key pillars for your strategy. And that's a great way to be able to communicate and share information about where it is that you're going and what you're planning with those stakeholders. They don't necessarily need to see all of your planning documents and behind.
Excellent. Thank you, Megan. Okay, so on to our final slide. We hope this has been a good sort of refresher for you. We hope we've shared some good top tips and just given you the opportunity to take a bit of a break from everything else that goes on the day-to-day and start thinking about what's next for your association. We've covered what strategic thinking is. We've covered some top tips on how to pull together a strategy workshop, and we've explored some common pitfalls. Hopefully, you'll start buzzing with ideas to take back to your boards. If you need any help at all, that's what TAS are here for. So please do make sure that you tap into that resource and let us help you as and where needed. On the slide here again, we've got the QR code for the Academy. So to unlock the strategic planning for boards completely complimentary, this is a limited time only offer. All you need to do is purchase 3 of the other modules available in the Academy, pop that free TAS course code into the discount box on the website, and that will automatically be added to your basket free of charge as a gift from TAS. So that QR code is available there. Otherwise, I think that brings us neatly to the end of the session this evening, which is great because I'm sure it's probably feeding time at the zoo for everybody. But before we tie this up, it'd be great to welcome any questions that anybody may have. Megan, I think if questions do come through, you might have to field them, or I can see if I can do that this end. Let's have a look. Just whilst we give you a moment to type if there are any questions that you've got, whilst we're again preparing for this, Megan, actually you flagged a couple of great questions I thought that people might have. One was actually around sort of facilitation, and does that need, how do you pick the right person to facilitate a strategy planning workshop? Did you want to sort of share that with everybody?
Sure. In terms of facilitation, some organisations are able to and comfortable to work on facilitating their own sessions. And in those instances, that's when it's really useful to make sure that you've got a very strong agenda in place. External facilitation can also be really helpful, either with somebody within your industry already, or TAS can at times facilitate the strategic sessions for you as well, if that's something that you are interested in exploring a little bit further. We did also have another question about how to resourcing some of your strategies. So if your organizations come up with some fantastic ideas and you really want to be able to deliver it, but you're very limited in terms of the number of resources that you've got available, some of the options that you can start thinking about could be forming working groups within your membership, engaging with your members or stakeholders to see if they can help partner or work with you, or to consider whether the organisation might be able to fund consultants or other people to provide support on some of those great ideas that you have. Amazing. Thank you, Megan. I don't believe that we've had any questions come through on the chat. It could just be, which, Megan, I'm going to take that as a big fat compliment that we've been very comprehensive this evening and we've covered everything off, which is great. If anything does spring to mind after the webinar, then please do reach out to your association manager or somebody else at TAS. Will definitely get back to you if you've got any queries ahead of pulling together one of these workshops. We'd love to build on this channel of communication and do more sort of training and education like this. So if it's been good and helpful, then please do let us know. Feedback, positive feedback or constructive, all of it will be taken on board. Otherwise, Megan, I think that is us for this evening. I think so. Maybe just a note for anybody who perhaps hasn't had an opportunity just yet to do the modules in the e-learning academy. They have been specifically designed to be nice and bite-sized. So you get lots and lots of information, and you can do them in between maybe 30 minutes to an hour. So makes it a lot easier to be able to fit that learning in and around the rest of your incredibly busy lives. Don't be put off by yet another thing to do.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for dialing in. Thank you so much, Megan. You've been a fantastic co-host, and we'll look forward to seeing where this all goes.